Not even my cat.
Andy, what was that?
Not even my cat.
No, I don't want to hear your cat. Thanks. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to Making the Most of Manure. We're on our second session where we're just talking about digestate tonight. And I really like that we can do a deep dive into manure. Just kidding, I've always wanted to say that. We're doing a deep dive into just one type of manure so that we can get really clear about what its value is. And this is all part of the Timing Matters initiative, which is a group of farm organizations in Ontario that are coming together to just do a better job when it comes to manure timing. And ultimately, it's for soil health and water quality and our social license. My internet will probably continue to be unstable all night. And my name's Mel Limas, and I'm here with OPACA, which is the Ontario Professional Agri Contractors Association. We're working with the Timing Matters initiative to deliver these. We're a group of manure contractors, but also anyone that does like anywhere from planting to harvesting. We represent and connect agri contractors in Ontario. And tonight, I mean, it's going to be a fine line between participants and panelists, but on the hot seat, we have Carl Fruck from Marl Creek Renewables, Brett Israel from 3Gen Organics, Jonathan Zettler, Fieldwalker Agronomy, and Christine Brown from OMAFRA. And also, we've got a few other experts on the call, so I'll probably be calling on you. Carl, could you just give a little bit more of an explanation of where you farm and what you're doing? Sorry to put you first.
Thanks, Mel. Yes, we farm just northeast of Walkerton. We're in the municipality of Brockton. We operate a beef feedlot, and all of our beef manure, solid beef manure, goes through an anaerobic digester. And we have been treating manure through an anaerobic digester since 2012. So we have a nice bit of history data to kind of prove that a lot of our land is being maintained, and we have records and all that stuff. We do work with an independent agronomist as well, so that has really kind of broadened our knowledge or our education on soil. We are the only beef feed yard in Ontario using beef manure in an anaerobic digester that is solid manure. There is another beef farmer in Ontario that is using liquid beef manure out of a slat barn. So we're trying to promote that, you know, beef manure does work in digesters, and that the treatment of it is beneficial for the nutrient-rich fertilizer that comes out of a digester afterwards. So yeah,
Awesome.
Is that enough?
Yes, we'll hear from you again, but yeah, I would love to hear from Brett a little bit more about you and where you farm and how you use digestate.
Sure. Well, thanks. Digestate is part of like a whole system management for us. Pulling digestate out of the BioN plant outside of Elmira. We also have had some experience bringing on some digestate coming out of the Wales digester, which is, I'm pretty sure, a good combination of some livestock manure and other sources. Christine would probably know a bit more about that. So in general, the digestate's been a nice tool to add to our system and to
I'm not even sure if I'm here anymore. My internet is so unstable. But yeah, thanks, Brett and Carl. Jonathan, a little bit about yourself and the work that you do with Digestate.
So I run a crop consulting business, kind of North Wellington, Huron, Bruce Grey, parts of Perth. It's kind of the general area that I cover, and provide tech support to the Woolwich Biowind plant. Actually, it's a different name now, but that's what most people know it as. And that's the plant that Brett pulls out of. I kind of like seeing the material that otherwise historically maybe would have went to landfill or other places get turned into electricity and then get applied on land. And there's lots of crops that can benefit from it, but we also need to watch where we use it, because depending on how you apply it and the rates and that, it can cause more headaches than maybe it's worth. So definitely a good fit for many operations, but there's also some downsides.
Nice, and we'll talk about that too. And Chris.
I'm a field crop sustainability specialist with OMAFRA, aka a manure person, and have worked with all kinds of manure, but also all kinds of digestate, both from farms and from the different municipal facilities. So Biowind, Storm Fisher, Seacliff out of Leamington, and some of the other ones that are up and starting. So similar to Jonathan, it has a really nice fit for many types of farms, but there are definitely some things to watch out for.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And we've got a lot of interesting people on the call too. So I wonder if you could just pop in the chat or unmute yourself just to do a quick introduction. I see Adrian Gunsberger is also a manure contractor, but works with solid manure, and you can hear from him tomorrow. Hi, Adrian. Jeff Bannerman is with CropQuest and also does nutrient management consulting. Andy is an agronomist, also doing consulting. Glenn Monroe and Susan Antler from the Compost Council. I see Ian McLaughlin from, I feel like Romper Room, like for reals this time. I see Ian McLaughlin from A&L. Hi, Ian. Who else? Chad Burley, Anderson's Canada. Awesome, thanks. Yeah, no, would love to know who's here, and just we've got Charlie Lalonde, who's all over the place like me with the OFA, I imagine today. Hi, Charlie.
I moved my today.
What's that? Hi, Glenn. You turned yourself on. John, who are you?
So I'm John Markew. I'm one of the partners behind Highwood Organics Processing out in Alberta. So we're building a composting and biogas operation in Higher River, right across the street from Cargill. So we came across, my boss came across this and figured one of us should attend. So I'm here.
Excellent. No, very glad you're here. Very glad. Yeah, we've got a few farmers. Simon Muhlendyke, are you still with Listec? I hope you are.
I am. Thanks for
thanks for the shout out.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like a lot of you will know what we're talking about, but just in case, I thought we should actually start with what is digestate. And sorry if this is going back to kindergarten for some of you, but I think it's important that we understand like the process of anaerobic digestion and what's the end result, I guess. I don't know who wants to start here. I'll chime in. I'll ask all of you, what is digestate? Chris, what would you say?
I'm probably not the person you should have asked first.
Okay. You're going to pass for real?
I'm going to pass, yeah.
How about Jonathan? You want to speak to this slide?
So this is a picture in the bottom right-hand corner of the Woolwich plant, and digestate is the byproduct of something that's decomposed from an organic material standpoint. So this particular plant takes the paunch manure from the Cargill plant in Guelph, green bin waste, which is what's in the top right-hand corner there, leaf material, expired food, those types of materials go into that plant. It's got a negative air pressure system, so none of the gases that from the decomposing food are generated go through a scrubber before they can get out. So you can stand beside the plant and not even know that it's a biogas plant because of how it's operated. But essentially what you're getting and applying to the field is the leftover liquid material and solids that are suspended in that material. And then we use that as fertilizer. Okay. So kind of the process is the green bin waste comes in, or the manure or whatever the organic source is, that gets dumped into the tank after it's sorted or cleaned through a screener and ferments or generates the gas. The gas gets burnt off and generates electricity. So that building that's separate in that particular picture is where the generators are. And then to the left is approximately what the analysis is coming out of this plant as fertilizer value. So 30-10-10, 2 sulfur per 1,000 gallons, and about 165 pounds of organic matter.
Nice. And is that going to change over the year, or is that pretty consistent analysis?
There can be fluctuations depending on a variety of factors. One is the source material that's going into it. The other is where are you within the tank, because stuff does settle out after a period of time. And so if you're not agitating, that's one thing that you can lead to some differences in analysis over time. So you're not dealing with a product like commercial fertilizer where you have a consistent manufacturing source and product coming in the front end. So there is some variability sometimes to the material, but as long as you know that and fertilize accordingly, it can be a really good product.
Nice. Biology. And Carl is tell us about doing it on farm.
So we, as a beef farmer with solid manure in Ontario's environment, having a biogas plant since 2012 has changed the way that we manage our manure daily. And the turnaround effect from having an on-farm biogas plant is the fact that we are able to store our daily nutrient or daily manure requirements at the biogas plant, feed it into the biogas plant daily. And then as we are operating our facility on the back end, we separate our solids out of our digester, and then that screw presses solids off, and then our liquid is then stored for crop production fertilizer. The interesting thing for us has been animal husbandry, the amount of time that we have been able to save in animal husbandry by cleaning cattle out, because we have to scoop all our manure out of our pens weekly and get the cattle put back into their pen in a timely manner, and be able to achieve all of that and keep cattle clean, not disrupting their habits, basically. It's been an environmental, socially, economic, there's quite a few factors that it has benefited us on our farm having an anaerobic digester. So the interesting thing behind all of that is, if we only bedded our cattle, our beef cattle, with straw, we would not get 7 days of husbandry or 7 days of pen cleaning. But with the solids that we use out of the digester, we are able to achieve at least 7 days. So that means that we not only cut down on time of labor, equipment, the manure is still being produced. So if there's cattle in a pen for 7 to 10 days, that's a lot more manure than if it was 4 or 5, obviously. But the impact on the cattle and moving them out of their pen, clean the pen out, just the labor, the timing, the equipment, a lot of that stuff, we've been able to see the benefit from so many factors. It's kind of hard to explain unless you've been in the business of feeding beef cattle in a conventional setup where the manure is on the concrete. So at our facility, we are similar to the Corb Whale facility in Drayton or the Dave Green facility in Tavistock, where we are under the nutrient management, so regulated mixed anaerobic digester facility governed under nutrient management. And we are allowed to bring in a certain percentage of material that we call off-farm material. So off-farm material is what Jonathan spoke about, animal and food processing waste that has the ability to be decomposed in an anaerobic digester. So hopefully I hope I answered your question, Mel.
Yeah, no, for sure. Did anyone else have more questions? Or I'm curious if there's anyone else that actually has a digester on the call. But Chad had a question about what is the moisture in the bedding after the press? So
we have ran 2 screw presses for a little over 9 years, and we are at that 60 to 65% moisture. So we'll have a 25 to 35% dry matter. But the interesting thing is it is full of moisture, but it is absolutely incredible when we put it about 4 or 5 inches deep on the concrete in the entire pen, throughout every pen we use, along with straw and corn stalks. It makes for a tremendous comfort and bedding for the cattle. So 60 to 65% moisture.
Nice. Thanks.
Hey, Carl.
Yeah.
If you could get it drier, would that
Yep.
be a benefit? Is it a cost? It's a cost versus end use type of thing. So if you could get it down into a 20% or 30%, would that mean you could use less straw, less corn stalks, something like that?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a friend in Austria that does dry the solids that are reclaimed out of the screw press separators. The benefit behind that for bedding purposes would be incredible. And the way I seen it being done was they had a building with basically the same floor as what grain bins have, and they just blow excess heat off of their combined heat and power units, because we have 3 combined heat and power units. We produce 3 million, I don't know, 3.5 million BTUs an hour of thermal heat. So if we had a building, we could put the bedding in and then shelf it, like almost like bunker silos. So you would have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in one bunker, Thursday, Friday, Saturday in another, and then you pulled that out and it was dried and you filled it back up. And then the air was going up through the bottom like a grain dryer. That's the way I saw it being done. It was economical, not expensive, and relatively simple, where you're not turning it. You don't got a lot of equipment involved. So very beneficial, yes.
So you wouldn't be moving that very far because it's on farm, right?
Yeah, we move it
Yeah, feet,
800
not,
feet.
yeah, okay. So if you were going to be doing it in a larger scale, being drier would really help you on the freight end of it, wouldn't it?
That, yeah, you're not going to get much weight, like it'd be like dry shavings, right? But absorbent wise, it would be incredible. It'd be like kiln dried shavings, because it'd be extremely dusty. Because in the summertime, we have it where we have there's times of the year where we have an abundance of the solids, and we just pile it up at the barns so that it's ready, you know, because there's times where equipment breaks or we get wet weather. We have to clean out cattle more often or whatever, but we like to try and inventory that. And if it was dry, it would be that much more. You wouldn't need as much. How about that? You could get longer life in a pen, and you would also not need as much. So that's a very good point.
Thanks, Chad. And Carl.
Who was that? Sorry, I didn't.
Chad Burley.
Okay.
Guys should connect afterwards. It sounds like Chad might have some ideas too. There you are.
Sorry to cut in, Mal. That's got a question for Carl.
Yeah.
What do you do with the heat, the excess heat that's produced? Do you use it, or is it just lost?
A day like Saturday, in our area, we were pretty cold, and it's been cool, like -15 to -20. So our solid manure, all our thermal heat that we produce is used in a 4,500 cubic meter digester. And we have 230 or 140 cubic meter hydrolysis tanks. We have a couple, so Christine's the only OMAFRA person, so I got to go back to 2010 and 11 when our I got to make a joke here to OMAFRA. But does everyone
I'm already
know Mike,
laughing. Sorry.
does everyone know Mike Muffles? He worked with OMAFRA for a little bit anyways, back in 2010. And
yeah,
when we had to do our initial setup and explain to them how many cubic meters of material we had on hand, you know, in process and storage and all that other. And so anyways, I told Mike Muffles what he wanted to hear. Okay. So anyways, long story short, all our thermal heat goes to heat 4,500 cubic meters of material in the digester. It goes to heat up pre-treatment tanks or hydrolysis process. That takes, we have to take our off-farm material that comes in from outside the farm up to 50 degrees Celsius and hold it there for 20 hours. So you could just imagine the amount of thermal heat required on Saturday. Okay, so unfortunately, we need that heat at certain times of the year, Chad, but there's times of the year where we are venting off thermal heat that would be utilized elsewhere, i.e. drying bedding or, you know, other avenues.
Do they make any different types of screw presses currently that could do a different job than the one you're doing?
I sure hope so, because the ones we have are extremely frustrating. Yes. We've had the same ones for 9.5 years, and we rip ours apart weekly to do maintenance on them. If we do that, we are in very good shape, and it costs us a lot less money. But if maybe I'm not like every other facility or business or industry across the country right now, but we are short of help. And if it doesn't get done, it usually ends up costing more money than if we were able to stay on top of it more. They're a high maintenance piece of equipment.
High maintenance. There's another question coming in from Charlie, but we might get to that later about the pathogen destruction. Or do you think we should address that now? Because that goes for all of it. Does it get hot enough to destroy the pathogens?
So in the OMAFRA rules and the Ministry of Environment on an on-farm facility and or the Woolwich facility, I don't know, Jonathan, if you want to chime in here, just interrupt, but basically through the Ministry of Environment and OMAFRA regulations, we are obligated to test for Listeria, Salmonella, and E. coli once a year. And we do that. And I would have to look at the regulation again, but we feel very, very confident in our test and through the process of anaerobic digestion of having, so if everyone could understand retention time. So if you are building an anaerobic digester, you're building it not, you're building it for more than the, how do I want to word this? you want to build it to do the correct thermal treatment of any product going through that with the correct length of time. And we call that retention time. So the amount of volume we feed into a digester in a daily or 24-hour period over the course of that reflects how many days that product's going to stay in the digester. For retention time means that the ensuring pathogen destruction at the other end. And through proper design, construction, and engineering of an anaerobic digester, digestate is more dense. It comes out the bottom. We feed in on top. There's a lot of very, very simple concepts in anaerobic digestion, but they do have to be built correctly to have pathogen destruction be correct or accurate.
Yeah.
Or complete, I guess is more the word.
So many words, Carl. Jonathan, did you have anything more to add to that? Or anyone else?
The facility that I work with, they do test for pathogens to make sure that the process is working properly.
Yeah.
And regularly take it to a lab that they work with, which is the same lab that Carl is working with by the looks of things from the reports. So.
Similar. Maria.
Just a quick question. You mentioned at the start that you had you were using solid manure right in your system, and then you're adding the off-farm material. So do you have a wet digestion process? Would that be correct, Carl?
Yeah. Yes. So the way that we manage our solid manure is we use the liquid after our screw presses to hydrate our solid manure in a pit. Unfortunately, in Ontario, with not only, a high humidity summer or a wet fall or a wet spring, as a beef farmer, we have times where we have very loose manure after heavy rainfall or whatever. So we have to be able to gather that up and put it into a pit. So we have a system that we mix our solid manure with the liquid after the screw presses, which is called digestate, to get our manure to a pumpable form. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So
Yeah.
if we were using just solid manure and augering it in, or somehow of another way of putting that manure into the digester, it would still be a liquid digester, ma'am. It's just that there's a lot of challenges behind adding big amounts of solid mass and being able to get it mixed and fine enough for the digester to work correctly.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks very much.
Goodness, the questions keep coming, and we haven't even started talking about the value and the nutrients in it. But Andy did have a question. I think we're kind of going to get to that later, Andy. Obviously, you're destroying the pathogens. Does it affect its ability to add to the soil microbiome? And I'm like, still organic matter, right? It's not coming with, I think the same is always true. I always wondered about Listagrow too. That same sort of technology, it doesn't keep the microbes there.
Yeah, and I'll maybe just make a comment on that one. So it maybe doesn't have as much organic matter as the initial manure product would, but you've got the nutrients that are feeding the microorganisms in the soil. And so if there's already diversity in the soil, you're feeding, and feed them, they will come kind of thing. With the processed biosolids, yes, you've got the nutrients, they're feeding the microorganisms, but it's gone through a process. It's gone through some treatments with pretty high, in some cases, pretty high heat or alkaline material. And so I think that's going to affect the microbiology a little bit, not long term, but it might affect the different species in the soil for a period of time. But I think the real thing with the digestate, just because of the process it's gone through, you've got biology in the system, and it's feeding because it's high nutrients, it's feeding the soil.
I'd like to hear Jonathan, just if I'd like to hear if you had any comments on that, please.
I'm not that concerned about it myself. From my perspective, if you have nutrients that are lacking in the soil, like adding crop nutrition to the soil that is like biologically available, and like the stuff is active, like it's got some very big firepower behind it from an availability standpoint. It's not like you're dealing with very strawy solid dairy manure that takes a while to become available. This stuff's like rocket fuel for crops. And if you have soil biology on ground that's maybe been beaten up a bit and has been under fertilized, like this is like Red Bull for it, in my opinion. But
Yeah, and I guess we underestimate the soil microbiology, their ability to multiply. That's probably
Right.
what I'm underestimating, I guess.
I've worked with this stuff on cover crops for multiple years when I was still in retail, because one of the people that at that time that was working with it was an investor in the plant. And like the difference between putting it on and not was like tenfold as far as what you got for a cover crop. Like it was just crazy. So.
Yeah, and that was the same with some side-by-side truss that we did with the anaerobic digestate, and putting it on oats that was harvested afterwards. And we had
Should I start showing the presentation?
maybe,
But
the yield difference was basically a 40% difference where digestate was applied to the oats in yield, and then also in quality.
Yeah. Well, how about we slowly get to that slide? I've got these are your the analysis of your plant, Carl. Did you want to speak to them? These are 4 in a row, and they kind of show differences. If you can see them, sort of, they're kind of hard to see. But did you want to speak to that as to like why it's different over the course of the year, Carl, and what that means for you?
I think some of it, we take our sample from the same spot.
Yeah.
Every time. We do it when we do a lab analysis for our biologists. We have our own biologists within one company. So we do the end use, we call it the end use tank or whatever. At my facility, I have a very, very large issue managing nitrogen, ammonia, ammonium all year long. The reason behind that is a high energy finishing manure, like for beef cattle. So we're on that 75 to 85% corn product in our rations going into finishing cattle. We have corn stalks for bedding. We have reclaimed bedding going through our beef barns every day. And then when we have to hydrate our solid beef manure receiving pit before we can pump it, we are adding and compounding nitrogen. And if we do not manage that soon enough, you will see where I think the one analysis there was what, 70 something of nitrogen. Yeah, that one there.
Just that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic fertilizer, but the ramifications operating a digester with too high a nitrogen is a bigger problem. So,
no, it's interesting. Well, I mean, it's an animal. It's literally.
Yeah, we're a little bit different because of the way that we manage our solid bedding and the way we manage our solid manure to get it back into the digester. So that's.
That was a similar problem that they had in Niagara when they were using dog food or pet waste pet food, and it was almost to the point where there was so much nitrogen it almost crashed the system. It was affecting the biology in the digester.
Wow.
So does that answer your question on why we have some variability?
Yeah, and the importance of, yeah, well, you've got to do continual testing. But yeah, and speaking of testing, I would love it if Chris would talk about, this is like OMAFRA's data that you've got to really give us a good idea of what nutrients we're looking at here.
Yeah, so the chart on the right, it's got the digestate. So this is from Gord and Dave Green's farm. And so it's the liquid portion and then the screw press solid portion, just fresh samples. And so it gives an idea of the dry matter. So somebody was asking before about the dry matter. So on Dave and Gord's farm, it's 30% or basically 70% water. And then depending on how you look at the nitrogen, if it's fall applied or spring applied, ranges between 15 and 32 pounds. And so the value on a per 1,000 gallon available nutrients is about $67 first year, and then some residual from the organic portion and the remaining phosphorus, although probably all the phosphorus is available very quickly. The bottom two samples, they are from BioN. One is a fresh sample taken from the plant. The other one was stored for 6 months. So brought to the pit in the fall and then retested in the spring. And one of the things with the digestate is that it has a very high pH. And so there's and we'll maybe get that into that in the next slide, but because it's got a high pH, it's also got a high potential for ammonia loss. And so this is an analysis. This is a fresh, and I guess I just want to go through the analysis for a second, just to, it's from.
Sorry, like, what do you want, Chris? This slide?
Sure, we'll go with that one. So there's a couple of things when you're reading an analysis that in AgriSuite, we use a lot of this information to give us the pounds available and the value, but there's some things that we test for that give a little bit more information on a analysis. And so I've got highlighted the phosphorus in yellow, and that's the total phosphorus. So that's what we use in the AgriSuite to give us the available. So A&L also puts in the phosphate as P2O5. And so it'll say here that it's 14.2, but that's the full value. That's not the 80% value that we use, or the portion that's available right away. And the same with the potassium. So if you're using it in AgriSuite, you want the total phosphorus, the total potassium, not the portion that's already as K2O. Organic matter, in this case, 3%. pH is one that I really want to emphasize for a few minutes, and we're going to talk maybe a bit more about it afterwards. The pH is high, and we had an aha moment when we were doing side-by-side comparisons at Gord Green's place several years ago. We were doing a manure on forages project. The first year we did it, we were using manure from his farm. Then the next year he had converted to digestate. We said, okay, let's use digestate. So we're doing it on his hay fields. We put up dosimeter tubes. Dosimeter tubes at about 8 inches measures the ammonia. We would put pails on top of it to try and get an idea of what was the ammonia loss from applying manure on the surface and from different methods. And because it was a Saturday and Gord was there, and I said to him, I'll show you what we're doing because people are going to ask what all these pails in the field, because it looks really weird. And so showing them, and one of the dosimeter tubes where we had just applied the digestate an hour before was at an ammonia loss level that was higher than what we saw in dairy manure after 2 weeks. And that was just in an hour. And it was like, what in the world? And so when we did the analysis, it was like, oh, the pH is really high. When you have high pH and you have high ammonium, that loss is very, very quick. And so when we give the nitrogen value, really the management is essential, because if it's not incorporated right away or injected, we start losing a lot of that ammonium nitrogen very, very quickly. And so when we say this is what's available, there's a potential for some of that nitrogen to be lost and not available. And lost as ammonia, but potentially also as nitrous oxide.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan.
I just wanted to add that Christine, when you were seeing that was in like August, right? Like some of that's temperature dependent.
It's temperature dependent, but even when it was cooler, we were still seeing the same kind of thing. So yes, it's temperature related, but the loss is still going to be quite a bit higher than regular manure at a pH of 7 or lower.
Yes, you're still at greater risk of loss because of the type of material that you're working with, but some of it's driven by the temperature that you're working with.
Yeah, definitely.
You
And that's
see in-
true. That's true with all manures.
Jeff?
Yeah, like
Oh
on the,
goodness. Do you want me
Yeah.
to stop sharing?
no, that's fine. The pH issue, like I work with another member of the Cornerstone group there that Carl is with down in Stratford area, large dairy operation, and doing similar type of process of reusing the bedding and adding stuff there to it as well, and seeing the same sort of results. And the pH in their analysis that I have here it's like a 7.6. But I also work with a large number of abattoirs where we got a lot of blood in the material, and we got a lot of odor. And what we've been doing there is just putting a simple straw cover on those tanks, and it just totally eliminates the loss of the odor there. And the testing that I've been doing over the years with those is we've increased the amount of nitrogen that we've been retaining in the tank and available then to the farm for the application. So same sort of idea, I imagine, Christine, that we'd be able to see here on these digestate tanks.
Yeah, that's one of the recommended is to try and cover it with straw or with some type of product, maybe even biochar someday. Andy's got his hand up too, and
Yeah,
Adrian.
sorry. I wasn't ignoring you, Andy. Just kidding. I was. I'm not even going to tell him that he's muted.
Since this
Go ahead.
morning's session there, I went and checked my manure samples there.
Yep.
And there wasn't a pH. It wasn't sampled for pH, and I just wondered, is that Christine? Is that something you had to order special?
Yeah, I order that now on all my manure samples.
Yeah, I think I will.
Because it's funny because even in pig manure, there is quite a variation, and I'm sure it's feed related to some extent and maybe storage related, but you've got pH in some cases that is 7, in some cases that's 8+. And if we've got that high pH and we've got that high ammonia, it's a good thing to know, because then we manage it differently to try and maximize the nitrogen, especially with high fertilizer prices like we have right now.
No question, yeah.
Hey, something else on that pH front, Christine. I know certainly in the swine business, always looking at managing the pH in the gut of the pigs. And so a lot of folks have been looking at acidifying water through different levels of their growers or in their nurseries or whatnot. We've been using apple cider vinegar as a great addition to the water source for our hogs, and seen a great improvement, like real reduction in scours. And I'm wondering if there's any, obviously if it's an integrated approach with some straw adding in there, if you can get your hands on something to acidify it a wee bit, would that help at all, or not really, or what do you think there?
Yeah, anything that acidifies is going to help reduce the ammonia loss.
Right.
One of the things I saw in the chat that somebody is acidifying in Europe. There's a really interesting system in Denmark where they are dribbling on a sulfur. I think it's a sulfur hydroxide type of product, and they're dribbling it on at application, and it's with a dribble bar, so it's surface applied. Well, right at the surface in low rates per 8 inches, but they're putting the sulfur product on to try and acidify it a little bit, but also provide the sulfur that the crop needs. Because adding the sulfur or adding the acid product in the storage is expensive, and if you've got low pH soils, you probably don't want to do that. If you've got high pH soils, that's a different story. So there's to every action, there's a reaction, and you have to know what the full picture is.
Yeah. Charlie
I'd
asked
like to try that though.
Yeah. Anything else on that pH issue?
Yeah,
Or
I'd
is
like
that-
to say, Mel,
Yeah.
I'd like to say that, we've always not neglected the pH when we tested manures, but with the commercialization of, say, digestate and compost and such, we have incorporated that into a package. So we do have the pH. And as Christina said recently, it's become more aware that it is very, very dependent on the amount of nitrogen loss. So yes, it's recognized now. So, okay.
Glad that you're here, Ian. Hear it straight from the horse's mouth. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So can I make one other comment in the analysis? One of the things that I like testing for, just especially with digestate and where there is potentially green bin or other products coming in, and that's the total salts. So if somebody is applying the digestate and then planting right into it or something like, then there is the chance for some salt injury. And the total salts includes the nitrates, the potassium salts, the some of the other micros, but it's not a problem if it's surface applied or if it's incorporated and not planted into for a couple of days, but it's where it's applied right away and applied and then planted into right away that it can be an issue. And Ian probably has something to add about that.
No, I've been working on, a program with digestate for the lab, and one of the things is the American biogas situation. They have a situation, and they always look at EC. Okay, they do recognize conductivity as one of the key factors of availability. So.
Adrian's being super patient. Is it the same topic or is it going to
Yeah.
shift gears? Okay.
What you talked
ahead, Ben.
about with the high pH and the ammonia loss, is that just in the liquid, or are you seeing the same in the solid digestate as well?
I would see the solid digestate as well. We did a trial at our place with some solid pellets from Storm Fisher when they were trying to dry their product, and yeah, it had a high pH and it had some nitrogen loss for sure.
Does it happen right away then, or not till you get a rain and it gets wet, or it doesn't matter?
I think it happens right away.
I think also, Adrian, it's any biological activity is time, temperature, and moisture. So with every temperature of 10 degrees, it doubles, and moisture is a variable too. So more temperature, more moisture, the quicker it happens.
I haven't done the testing on this, Christine, but would it make a difference if it was put on lower pH soils versus high pH soils?
That's a
Andy.
good question. I have no idea. Somebody else maybe can answer that. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyone else want to have any experience with that?
I think, Andy, the biggest problem is how much N is being lost before it even gets to the field in the first place, right?
True story. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Christine, well, and Charlie, is anyone creating struvite?
Not that I know of.
I'll get to everyone's
Struvite
questions
is-
eventually. Who's that?
Struvite is screw pressed biosolids. Like that's what the Nutripel and stuff is.
Is there anyone?
Can I just ask a question to Jonathan?
Yeah.
If it was a farm that had very, very poor soil samples, would the pH be low on a farm that is low in nutrients or low in levels?
I can
In
address
the
that.
area that you're in, no.
Not necessarily, like low nutrients, you can have low phosphorus and potassium, you can have high calcium, high mag soils. Some of the western soils. So basically, yeah, there's no, usually I found in looking at gobs and gobs of soils, you've got calcium and magnesium, and they influence the pH more than anything. It's the carbonates that influence the pH.
Mhm.
Eroded soil is high in pH. Your
Correct.
knolls.
Your knolls, right?
Especially in
some-
Carl's area.
Yeah, the knolls will change the base soil, really. That's
Okay.
all.
I have one more question to whoever wants to. This is a concern. Copper.
Hmm.
Copper in soil. Is it a good thing? Bad thing?
Depends
Ian?
on whether you're raising sheep.
Yeah.
Oh,
We find that there are copper shortages, and they do influence it. So copper is one of those ones you don't need an awful lot, but you do need copper. Okay, and it has a disease resistance property to copper. So
Like a benefit to soil?
correct, yeah. Not as benefit of soil, but the benefit to soil biology and crop
Right.
physiology.
Especially in cereals.
The only place where I've seen copper as a concern, and this is where we compare it to what's allowed in biosolids. Biosolids has a very strict level which you can't go over. And the only manure source that has gone over that is in nursery pigs, where they use copper as kind of like an antibiotic alternative.
interesting. Input equals output. That's what we learned on this morning's call.
So is copper used in hog production other than nurseries?
I don't think so. Not very much.
There's a lot of copper used in the hort industry, coside, any of the bactericides. Coside is one of the ones that they put on for like tomato bacterial things. So there is a lot of copper used in the industry. I shouldn't say a lot, but I mean it is routinely used.
We also added it on potatoes and other crops like carrots when I worked in the Holland Marsh. Like, it's not the issue. Part of the issue is when you have a muck soil or organic soil, it ties it up, and then the plant can't access it. So then you have to supplement with it. But that's not really core to what we're here for. So
yeah, I was like, come on, I'm taking this sidebar back in.
But I think they also use copper in the muck on onions to get a good strong skin on the onions as well with the copper. So
If I can just make, I'm not going to try and raise any alarm bells, but OMAFRA and the Ministry of Environment are two very, very different entities on how they give approvals. So an on-farm biogas plant is allowed in their end, in our process, we are allowed to have a certain level of copper. And you're probably wondering where I'm coming from with this. If you are an industrial plant, and they are very good friends of mine, which is operated in Elmira, and then there's another facility in London and another one in Leamington. They are an industrial facility governed under the Ministry of Environment or an environmental compliance approval. Their numbers that are allowable in copper are, I think, 10 times what we are allowed on a farm, but can have the same agricultural source material output. So somewhere, somehow, Cornerstone, the one group that I'm part of, Cornerstone Renewables, or our biologist, and we could speak to the Mr. Ian fellow down in my corner, Ian McLaughlin, or someone like Jonathan Zettler. We need to get to the bottom of this. I'm not trying to use this as a free resource, but we are concerned in our group of significant digesters in Ontario, our coppers are going to be out of line. So OMAFRA needs to either figure things out if we are doing things correctly, because the large facilities are, I'm not kidding, 10 to 12 times higher in their facilities than they are in farms. So that's where my question came from. Off topic, but I think it's important for us to note that
Yeah.
from where we came from is what we think is being produced in the hog industry. And it's not a slander against the hog industry. It's because we deal with the hog industry on the waste side, and we test for that. And that's where we've kind of narrowed it down to the higher copper levels coming.
Yeah.
So I just asked some questions, that's all.
Yeah. Well, no, that's interesting for a lot of us on the call that to keep our.
I was trying to beat around the bush a little bit to make sure that we weren't harming anything with copper, but
See, you're
I think
sneaky.
I
want to move us back to actually how we do the application of digestate and how the value of that will change depending on when you apply it. Christine, I did see your question here about microplastics, and I hope we can get to that later. And a good point there about using calcium carbonate to treat your lagoon. But I want to let Brett Israel have a little chat about how you actually apply it. Like, you take it and you store it, because like, how far are you from the plant and how do you apply it? Just
for sure. So I think we can, we kind of cover a variety of different methods of application. It's been pretty apparent that in order to get the most, bang for the buck of it, we really have to be cognizant of when we are applying it and how we're applying it. So probably our couple preferred methods would be receiving digestate in February. I like to get it if we're putting into the pit when it's nice and cold out, right before half load season comes into effect. We have extra pit capacity beyond what we can produce from our own liquid swine manure. And so it's nice to be able to top up the pits, or in fact, build additional pits to be able to receive some extra digestate, and then not have to be running up and down the road with our manure spreader as much in season. And so if we receive it in February and get a nice coat of straw on it, we typically would then like to be able to start applying the product onto our winter small grains once we get to a green up timing, later part of March into the start of April. And we've had great success with that. I know we're losing some nitrogen, but I really think the bulk of the N loss is so temperature driven. And we found that if we're receiving it when it's cold and get that layer of straw over it, and then get about 3,000 gallons an acre applied onto our winter wheat, winter barley, winter rye, give or take, depending on what crop I'm speaking of, we can get very competitive yields with no additional nitrogen. Of course, we are a livestock farm, so we've got decent organic matter levels and a good amount of nitrogen that's cycling every year. But you can kind of see there on the bottom of the picture that was fertilizing a hybrid rye crop with the digestate, and it was about 130 bushel an acre crop this year. So for us, that's a great crop. And if it wasn't so darn hot at grain fill, we probably would have had some more yield there. But we're consistently being able to pull off, mid 90s to about 105 to 110 bushel an acre wheat yields with the digestate as the primary fertilizer source for that. We also like to have some digestate injected ahead of grain corn. And so if we're going to be spring applying it, when I consider spring, I mean, more so the warmer part of spring, end of April, May. It's a lot nicer to get it injected right off a truck, whether it be into a tanker with an injection unit or drag lined. I think if you're going to be fertilizing corn, that's pretty well the only way that I'd recommend doing it. If it gets put into the pit at that time of the year, the application rate has to go up so much because of the N loss. So that's a pretty important thing to be considerate of. And then another option too is applying it later into the fall. We've found that being able to take the digestate when others are unable to do so can be an advantage to us. And so you see the picture in the upper right-hand corner. We're applying it there at night on a frost there and applying it onto a cover crop. And then that field was high-speed disc the next day pretty well. So we're trying to do it in a variety of different ways. And we're finding that if we can really target when we're applying it and how we're applying it, we're able to have some pretty good success so far. we've had great corn yields when we do that spring application, but it's got to be injected, I think, in order to maximize yield potential. 5,000 to 6,000 gallons an acre is enough groceries to get over that 200 bushel an acre mark, no problem, in our opinion, if it's injected.
Mm-hmm. And being an organic farm, you can't really rely on the commercial fertilizers.
Yeah, for sure. So, I know there's obviously a lot of folks that will say for wheat, for example, or any small grain, you never want to be depending on organic materials for the, over 60% or 70% of the fertilizer value. We don't really have any other option, but we certainly are cognizant that this product, if you over apply it, you can get some lodging issues. So you got to kind of be cautious of that and make sure that you get as even of a spread pattern as possible. We spent a lot of time working on our splash pan for surface application to be able to get a pretty consistent spread pattern. And actually what we're going to be hoping to do, likely won't take place in the spring of 2022, but moving forward, we actually want to put not a dribble bar system, because they can have their fair share of challenges, but work with Husky manure systems and be able to actually have the equivalent of a surface application dragline system, so like a wing boom system, and go from one higher pressure splash pan to maybe 5 or 6 lower pressure ones, and keep the product closer to the ground under less pressure. That would be a great way to increase our evenness of spread, even under higher wind conditions. So lots of innovation, but I think it's a product that has a lot of promise if it's just used properly.
Yeah. And Chad's question, is it certified organic? And yes, it is. I guess my question would be also, Carl's, does that mean that all digestate is automatically accepted in organic certifications? Well, maybe Brad probably knows the ins and outs better.
Yeah, I don't think that it's a fair assumption to make that at all. The BioN plant in particular has to go through a different process than others might have to, and they've achieved that certification. So, but with them, we are relatively close to the plant. I don't think they're in the business of wanting to haul us a whole lot further. We have one farm in particular that's just around the corner, and one of the things that everyone needs to be cognizant of too, if you're thinking of utilizing this type of product, is how's it going to fit into your system. We're equipped with our own liquid manure application equipment, our own side dressing manure application equipment, our own storage for the product. But if you're depending on having it in the springtime, even are you on a full load or half load road? I mean, all these things play a big factor into it, right? So you gotta look at the whole logistics behind it.
Yeah, exactly. And what about Adrian?
Right. What kind of injector are you using? Using a low disturbance injector, or just on 30-inch spacing, or what?
Yeah, so Bartels has done a lot of our injection work for us. Pig might be doing some stuff for us as well, and they've had a couple different tools. Certainly, they've used their quad train as well as their dragline system, and so there's been some Coulter injectors, some Shank injectors. I think it really depends upon what shape the ground is in, right? So their Coulter injector did a great job last spring. We were injecting going into what would be corn ground. It was like end of March, start of April, and they were putting down, I think, 5,500 gallons an acre, and it was beautiful. I mean, they injected into it. We didn't work the ground in the fall at all. They injected right into a little bit of the dead oat cover crop stubble. We gave it a couple workings with our high-speed disc planted corn, and good recipe for about 190 to 200 bushel an acre corn there. So yeah, I'm happy with it. I think it just depends on the ground conditions.
So Mel, there's a picture of Bartels' injection system.
Yeah, I can get to it eventually.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
That's Bartels injecting it into a cover crop.
Yeah, they've got a few different injectors depending on what equipment they're using, right? So
sorry,
so
who
Mel,
needs to get muted?
Mel, can you go up to the corn slide that shows the nutrients? Because I think that's the reason why anaerobic digestate is such a nice product to incorporate into standing corn.
This
that
one?
one, yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, just that digestate, because it's so available, the nitrogen is so available. If you can inject it into standing corn between V6 and R1, the time when the nitrogen needs for the corn are just so high. And one of the things with manure, and especially with dairy manure or beef liquid manures, is that you've got a higher carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you don't get, especially if the conditions are cool, you don't get that mineralization of the organic nitrogen quick enough for the time that corn needs the most of its nitrogen. And so with the anaerobic digestate, it's a really nice source to provide that fertilizer and to be pretty sure that you're going to get the amount that you're thinking, especially if it's injected.
So it's rocket fuel because it's ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jonathan, would you agree? Oh,
just
sorry.
Just the logistics of that, right?
Red
Like,
Bull
it's,
for crops.
it's a lot easier said than done to be able to time that right, you know, because if they're looking, you know, if Bartels, for example, or any other company is holding it out of one of the site locations, you got to have all the logistics in place to be able to get the trucks unloaded adequately. If you're doing it right by the field, you know, a lot of side dress spreaders aren't necessarily equipped for that particular size to unload that truck right away. So there's a lot of logistics that go into it. And hopefully, as there's more and more units of that Cadman, you know, continuous dragline systems that can side dress into corn, that might be a great way to kind of achieve that. But I don't think we've really mastered that yet, because if you're going to be having it dumped into a pit and then putting it onto a spreader, there's still a lot of risk for end loss there. So that's kind of where we want to get to, right, Christine? Like, there's a lot of potential there, but logistics can trump agronomy sometimes, right?
Yeah. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Realistically, a plant like that one in Elmira, they're essentially shipping stuff hand to mouth. They have a bit of storage for a few weeks, maybe at most, but like, if you're serious about wanting to adopt something like this and wanting to do it on your farm operation, you pretty much need on-farm storage, in my mind, if you're going to do it, because just knowing how much material is available per day, like, they're going to ship you 50 acres worth and then you're done and have to start again the next day, and it just makes efficiency maybe challenging at times. So
yeah. Shall we speak about this slide, which is really looking at the timing that you put it on and how you do it really makes a lot of the difference. Chris, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah. So when we get the analysis from the lab, taken from the storage or at the time where it's taken to the field and applied, that's the maximum value, and management will decrease that value. And so using the AgriSuite software, where we put in the analysis and then we look at the different management systems. So this is the BioN Fresh applied at 5,000 gallons. And you can notice that if it's injected in the spring, that's the maximum value, and pretty confident that you're going to have that close to 175 pounds of nitrogen available. And the value of that digestate would be about $131. If it's applied and incorporated later, then AgriSuite will say 121, but the pH will say it's probably going to be lower, depending on what the weather conditions were. Oh, I think I have a typo. I think I forgot.
I was noticing the dollars per acre.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be 335.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sorry about that. We'll change that.
Guys.
Where's your cheap nitrogen coming from, Christine? Is that the government special or
no,
what?
it's $1.23 a pound, but no, that was sorry, that was a typo. That's when you try and do things last minute. Anyway, you can see that the value goes down the earlier we applied and the more surface application that we have. And sometimes like the whole application dilemma of when to apply it and how to apply it to get the maximum value really depends farm to farm what some of the other issues are. And it's making compromises, it's making trade-offs based on what's important on the farm. But if we can apply it in late summer, because we're on heavy clay soils and it works with the application schedule, then at least put it on with a cover crop. Surface applied just too much risk for too much loss. Yeah, so I'm sure others have comments to make about this too. And I think there's a slide that Jonathan has that really shows this one.
If you want to speak to this, Jonathan.
So this is just kind of a summary of conversations I've had over the last 2 or 3 years working with that plant, and depending on the method of application and time of application, you're probably going to have 13 to 30-ish, just because the product's variable, of nitrogen, and then about 10 phos, 10 potassium, and 2 sulfur. And that's kind of like, feel quite comfortable putting those numbers on for that particular plant. Now it's obviously different material than some of the other plants that's going into it. And sometimes it's higher than that, but it's not too often lower than that. So as far as what crops it goes on, well, that's kind of where we need to look at. If this was a commercial fertilizer that was going on, what do we need to meet crop demand? Well, because it's a high nitrogen product, let's pick crops that need nitrogen. Now, typically alfalfa, you wouldn't think it would need nitrogen, and it maybe doesn't, but some of the growers that have been putting on their hay crop have been quite impressed with the response that they're getting. So that's why that's there. Probably the best fit in my mind is on corn. So you use it to meet, like Brett had commented earlier, 50 to 60% maybe of your nitrogen needs, and then put the rest in as commercial fertilizer, just to make sure that you take out some application variability and maybe risk of loss, or availability in the field, depending on how you're applying it. Winter wheat, like Brett obviously is having some pretty strong success with it on winter wheat or winter cereals. I've seen people do it successfully. I have seen people have significant losses with it and also supplement with commercial fertilizers. So it probably depends a bit on when you're doing it and how you're doing it, and you need to watch the tramp factor. So once you get past growth stage 31 or first node, from my experience running custom map equipment, I'm not really excited about going out and tramping with floater tires every 25, 30 feet kind of thing. Spring wheat, kind of similar to winter wheat. Oats and barley, the risk there in my mind is if you put it on too heavy or unevenly, and you don't watch your seeding rates and don't manage with fungicide for crown rust, you run the risk of it being flat and having to have a neighbor combine it with a draper head if you don't have one. Soybeans, I don't really see much agronomic fit there myself, other than for the P and K value. But hey, if you got it and you want to put it on, you could use it, but maybe increases the risk of white mold a bit, just because of the amount of nitrogen that's in it, and you're going to get more vegetative growth. So,
Jonathan, I'd like to say though, one of the big things is crop removal and the nutrients, and so there's, when you look at your K removal, you look at, your calcium and some of the magnesium, I think you have to recognize that long term, you're building your soils by adding it, and so there's more build in some. If you put your digestate with your, specifically you put potash and say calcium and magnesium, and even phosphorus. We're very conscious about phosphorus, but we're adding phosphorus, and in a lot of those crops you had listed, there's a lot of removal. So it's just things to consider long term on your farm. And organic matter.
Yeah.
Organic matter, like look at the organic matter building your soil. So that comes back to soil health.
Just mention, Jonathan, just for your own peace of mind, I guess, is we ended up in 2020 applying enough digestate. Keyword there, agronomist people, OMAFRA people. We ended up applying on clay soil enough digestate in the spring, worked in. I want to make a few comments. Brett made a very, very good comment. logistically and
Agronomically.
yes, wow.
Yep.
It's a big word for Carl and Brant Township here. We, there's very, very different things. When you're dealing with liquid digestate, it moves. Like, it is not liquid beef manure. It's a challenging product. So yeah, we don't have injection tools or anything. We have a tractor and a disc or a ripper or whatever time of year it is, or what we're doing is right behind the spreader.
Yeah.
Where I wanted to go with this, Jonathan, to talk to your X-nay on the soybeans with digestate. We put enough digestate on to grow a crop of corn and had a complete switch on crop to soybeans. And the very first thing I said to the seed person was, he knows we have high fertility fields. He goes, did it get digestate this spring? And I said, yes. And he goes, how much? And I said, enough to grow a crop of corn. And we had 70 bushel soybeans, no white mold. But 2020 was a good year, remember,
right,
in our area for soybeans. So I've never had 70 bushel beans in my life. Like, so
They probably didn't do any of their own nodulation, though. They were probably fed entirely by the nitrogen in the digestate, which is fine. So you can do it, but if they had nodulated on top of that, they probably would have been flat as a pancake, maybe.
And if it had been 2021, you would have had a serious white mold problem, potentially.
Okay.
Like, some of it's going to be crop specific. I'm not opposed to putting it on soybeans, Carl, just to be clear. It's just, if you're paying for it, it's a lot of nitrogen that you maybe paid for, possibly, that you didn't necessarily need to spend. That's my 100%. Biggest concern.
That makes sense. Yeah.
That's
I
good. Forget
that we want to make sure that we're building soils, and yeah, we have it. It's a different that's like Brett said, the economics changes when you got to start moving product, and everyone that's in the livestock business knows how much it costs to move nutrients.
Oh yeah.
We used digestate in the fall of 2020 ahead of so after wheat into the cover crops, and so doing the economics on it, the transportation cost basically covered the P and the K. There was a little bit extra, but if there was no nitrogen available at all, it would be basically the micros that would make it valuable, because the transportation is quite expensive if the nitrogen isn't there.
I want to make this one comment, and I'm not educated like Jonathan or some other people in regards to some stuff here, but I want to share with you one farm, different soil type than where I live. It's a very, well, I've had it since 2005, and the word on the street in our area was, you'll never make that a farm. So anyways, we fed the farm a lot of solid manure before we had a digester. And we also have given it a significant amount of digestate. Fall 2018, we put a fall coating of digestate on this farm. It is a sandy loam farm. And we never put any commercial fertilizer on that farm. Just FYI, I have also not bought any commercial fertilizer in 9 years. And we did not put any commercial fertilizer on that farm in 2019. And the only thing it got in 2019 from fertilizer was some solid manure that froze in our pens that were great big lumps that we trucked to that farm and spread it in the spring. And we had 175 or 180 bushel dry corn. No fertilizer in 2019, fall applied digestate. So where I'm going with this, Christine, is we cannot underestimate our value of N if it's managed correctly in the fall. And I know it depends on weather, soil type, and of course, a good Brant Township farmer has a lot to do with it too. But I mean, I can't take all the credit. Okay.
Yeah, and that's
So-
the point I was making, Carl. Like if I had applied that surface applied on top of the cover crop and just left it, then it would be really hard to say, okay, how much of that nitrogen is left? So injecting it helped that economics. But if you're looking at transporting it and you don't have the storage and it's being applied by a custom applicator, you really got to do your homework to find out how am I going to maximize that value, because otherwise it's the micros we don't calculate into that equation. We probably should, because there's quite a bit of micronutrients there. But just on P and K, you really need to manage the end to make it pay.
Mhm.
Hey, Christine or Jonathan, just in terms of that follow-up question with Carl there, has there been any work done on, let's say, a late October to mid-November injection application, and if that makes a difference compared to injecting it, let's say, in September? Is there a certain benefit to getting a little bit closer to that freeze-up timing from a nitrogen perspective?
I think so.
I would agree, Brett. We do lots of late applications prior to December 1st, obviously, or any frost or snow.
Of course, this is being recorded.
November 40.
I know where all
42nd.
I know where all you people live.
Yeah, I know the closer you get to the colder temperatures, the less conversion of that ammonium to nitrate is really going to help. And then also the microorganisms in the soil are they're not zero. You're not going to get zero volatilization, but it's going to be a lot less than it would be in September.
Ian, did
So
you have a
if we
comment
lived in-
there? Oh,
Well, a little
I'll let
bit.
Ian go first.
okay.
I was just gonna say, working with a lot of Western soils, they put on their nitrogen in the fall as a practice. They've always, I shouldn't say always, but I dispute it a little bit, but they do. They put their nitrogen on in the fall. So, and
Jonathan.
they're growing cereals.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that they're counting on the nitrogen getting tied up with the frozen very shortly after they put it on. So.
Okay. Jonathan, your thoughts?
I was just going to say, like, if we viewed the product more or less as anhydrous, and you lived in Iowa or Western Canada when Ian was referring to putting it on in the fall, like they wait until the soil temperature is consistently under 50 degrees Celsius, and then the risk of conversion to nitrate, which is the leachable form, is a lot lower. Now, Ontario, with the amount of snow that we have right now, if you had fall applied stuff, the ground's probably not frozen, I would expect, in most areas, depending on when the temperature started to drop. Our ground doesn't really freeze, and the amount of moisture that we get, we're like 40-inch rainfall environment versus like a 13 to 20 at most in Western Canada, depending on where you are. Like it's just completely different growing conditions from that standpoint. So there is, if you're wanting to maximize the value, yeah, put it on as late as possible, inject it, and then you could maybe consider adding a product like N-Serve or there's different products that the anhydrous guys use to try and stop that nitrification from happening.
I agree, John.
Agreement. We've got just a few minutes left here, and I'm sure, like, welcome to stay a little bit after the fact if you want to chat a little bit more. But was there another burning question on the related to the value of manure? Maria had asked a question about, do you sample right before application to the field? I guess, yeah. You want to understand what it is? Brett, did you have
the plant?
Oh,
I was going to say the plant in Elmira samples once a month straight from the plant. And that's always best case scenario. So you arm wrestle a bit with some of the people. Sometimes, yeah, I know that's what the value is, but like by the time it ends in a tank and gets on, it's maybe not exactly that analysis in terms of value, but at least you have a best case scenario.
Yeah. But
I do mine.
but for a
Christine?
farmer,
Yeah, I do side-by-side comparisons, so I take them right from the tanker as it's going into the field
yeah,
when possible.
yeah. Jeff, you popped up. No. I've just,
One last question, Mel, one last question I have for Christine. Just out of curiosity, we've talked a lot about the nitrogen loss aspect of the digestate sitting in a presumed open top pit for that 6-month window. The P and K loss, what happened there? Just watered down, or where is that going?
I think it's watered down.
So there's still the same amount of P and K there. It's just
Yes.
extra water. Okay, all right.
yeah.
I think, Brett,
could-
Brett, the phosphorus is in the solids mostly. There's some dissolved, K. Okay, that's why we've got such a high value on the potash for availability. But I think you have to be conscious that the phosphorus is mostly in the solids, and so that as the tank is emptied and your phosphorus will increase with the solids. That's what I see with manure samples that I've looked at over the years. So.
And I'm remembering Charlie had a question before we even started. I don't know if we got to it. Maybe we'll answer it once we stop recording. But I've just put a link there because we'd love just some feedback on this discussion, but also just in general what you're up to. And I'll just close it up here. Oh goodness, we're going through the whole. Did we want to talk about Buck Ross just real quick, Chris? It's a shame that he's in here. I'm assuming this was cover crops with and without digestate to demonstrate the rocket fuel, right?
And he was, the reason I had this picture here was because he had red clover in the spring on wheat. And then after wheat harvest, he injected digestate and put some oilseed radish, turnip, and oats. I think it was oats into the mix and had a beautiful cover crop and didn't lose as much because he was injecting it.
Right. We're trying to get all our points in at the end. Yeah, was there anything else? We're just going through here.
Point, Chris, just to that point, like I know we talk a lot about the nitrogen that's available for the subsequent corn crop, but you get all this great cover crop growth. We know it's doing a lot of nice things for the soil and building organic matter. How much of that is going to be cycling and available to the subsequent? That's kind of the $1 million question, right? Because when you talk about that 40 pounds of N, that's 40 pounds, not including what the potential impact of a better cover crop could be. Of course, we could get too much growth and too much, the seed to N ratio could be off there too. It's like a lot to have to manage. You know what I mean? There's a lot of layers.
Yeah, there is. And it is the $1 million question because it depends. If you've got fields where you've had manure applied year after year after year, and you've got good nitrogen credit from the organic portion, and good nutrient cycling in the soil because of that organic matter, you're going to have more nutrient release from that cover crop than if it's a once in a 5-year or 3-year or whatever. And then the other part of it is if it's oats that's gone to head or rye that's gone to head, you've got quite a bit of cellulose there. It's going to take some nitrogen to break down that carbon before it's going to be available to the crop. So there's just so many, it depends. Clover is still the one that we give the nitrogen credit to, and the other ones are a little bit harder to determine.
Okay, thanks.
Good job, Chris. It's hard to cut it off, but I just wanted to end with this website that you can go and check out all these great resources. Whatever type of manure you're working with, OMAFRA's got the back end like analysis, and you can just play around in this, and no one's ever going to know. You can just do hypothetical situations. How much value is this? What if I apply to this time and all that? I don't know, Chris, was there anything else you wanted to talk about the AgriSuite?
No, just that since last year, the manure storage and sizing is new. And so if it lets you do all kinds of scenarios on how much manure is produced, how much differences in if it's covered versus not covered, or if there's treatments or those kind of things. So there's lots of things that you can try, just how management impacts.
Excellent. Thanks. And yeah, just wanted to thank you all for joining us and for your comments and the discussion and back and forth. We'll follow up with a few more resources, and this evaluation will be open up, especially if you're listening to the recording. We'll keep it open till March 1st, but would love your feedback, and yeah, very much appreciate your time.